The fluorescent lights of Martinez Family Market hummed their familiar tune as 3-year-old Emma sat cross-legged behind the candy counter, carefully arranging her collection of colorful toy cars. The Tuesday evening rush had died down, leaving only the gentle sounds of her father Miguel, restocking shelves, and her mother Rosa, counting the day's receipts at the register. Emma loved these quiet moments in their Phoenix convenience store, with the smell of fresh bread from the deli counter, mixed with the sweet aroma of penny candy that filled large glass jars. "Mia, it's almost bedtime," Rosa called softly in her melodic voice, glancing at the clock that read 8:47 p.m. Emma giggled and made vrooming sounds as she pushed her red fire truck across the polished linoleum floor, completely absorbed in her imaginary rescue mission. Miguel smiled at his daughter's innocent play while arranging bottles of motor oil on high shelves, his weathered hands moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had worked 16-hour days for the past 5 years to build this small piece of the American dream. The electronic door chime rang its cheerful welcome, and Rosa looked up from her calculator with her characteristic warm smile, ready to greet what she assumed was another late-night customer seeking milk or lottery tickets. Instead, her blood turned to ice as a tall figure in dark clothing and a black ski mask stepped through the entrance. The overhead lights reflected off the chrome barrel of a pistol held steadily in gloved hands. "Don't move. Don't you dare move," the masked intruder shouted, his voice rough and distorted with barely controlled rage. Rosa's hands flew to her mouth as a terrified gasp escaped her lips. The calculator clattered to the floor, its plastic case cracking against the hard surface. Behind the candy counter, Emma froze mid-play, her tiny red truck forgotten as primal instinct told her to hide. Miguel dropped the motor oil bottles, glass shattering across the floor as he instinctively stepped toward his family. "Please, we have a child," he began, his accented English thick with desperation. "Shut up. Get behind that counter now." The gunman's weapon swung between Miguel and Rosa, his finger visibly tightening on the trigger. "Empty the register. All of it. And the safe in the back." Emma pressed herself deeper behind the candy display, her small body trembling uncontrollably as she watched her parents' terrified faces. She had never seen her strong, gentle father look so afraid. Rosa's hands shook violently as she fumbled with the register keys, tears streaming down her cheeks as she tried to comply with the gunman's demands. "Faster! Move faster!" The intruder screamed, his agitation growing more dangerous by the second. He grabbed a bottle from a nearby shelf and hurled it against the wall, glass exploding everywhere. The sound made Emma flinch and accidentally knock over a small display of chocolate bars. The noise, barely audible above the chaos, caused the gunman to spin toward her hiding spot. "What was that? Who else is here?" His voice turned deadly quiet, more terrifying than his previous shouting. "No one, please, just us," Miguel lied desperately, stepping sideways to block the gunman's view of Emma's corner. "Take whatever you want, just please don't hurt my family." The register drawer shot open with a sharp ding, and Rosa began pulling out bills with trembling fingers. $20 bills, 10s, 5s, 1s, their entire day's earnings scattered across the counter. "Here, please, take it all," she whispered through her tears. But something in the gunman's demeanor had shifted. His eyes, visible through the mask's eye holes, darted around the store with paranoid intensity. "The safe! Where's the safe? I know you people keep more money hidden." "In the back office," Miguel said quietly, raising his hands higher. "I'll show you. Just please, let my wife go." As Miguel took a step toward the back of the store, Emma watched in horror as the gunman suddenly grabbed her mother by the arm. Rosa cried out in pain and fear, and something inside Miguel snapped. Despite the weapon pointed at his chest, he lunged forward to protect his wife. A gunshot exploded through the small store like thunder, echoing off every surface. Emma watched, her father's face twist in agony as he stumbled backward, red spreading across his white work shirt. Miguel collapsed against the magazine rack, his body sliding down to the floor as glossy pages scattered around him like fallen leaves. "Miguel! Miguel!" Rosa's screams pierced the night as she tried to reach her husband, but the gunman held her back with brutal force. Emma's small hands clamped over her mouth as she witnessed the nightmare unfolding before her 3-year-old eyes. Blood, so much blood, pooled beneath her father's still form. His eyes found hers across the store, and even through his pain, Miguel's expression carried a desperate message. Stay hidden, stay quiet, stay alive. The gunman ransacked the register, shoving bills into a black bag, while Rosa knelt beside her unconscious husband. "Please, call 911. He's bleeding so much," she begged, pressing her hands against Miguel's wound. "Nobody calls anybody." The intruder kicked over displays as he stormed toward the back office, leaving Rosa alone with Miguel's motionless body. Emma remained frozen in her hiding spot, watching her mother cry and whisper prayers in Spanish, while trying to stop the bleeding with her apron. Minutes felt like hours until the gunman emerged from the back office, his bag fuller, but his rage unsatisfied. He stood over Rosa and the unconscious Miguel, the weapon still trained on them. "You tell the cops you never got a good look at me, understand? You say it was too dark, too fast. Because if I hear different, I'll come back and finish what I started." With that final threat, he disappeared into the night, leaving behind a family destroyed and a 3-year-old girl who had seen too much for any child to comprehend. Emma remained hidden until the police and paramedics arrived, their flashing lights painting the store in alternating red and blue. From that moment forward, Emma Martinez never spoke another word. The trauma had stolen more than her family's sense of security. It had taken her voice, locking away her testimony behind walls of terror that no one knew how to break. Assistant District Attorney Rachel Stone stared at the crime scene photographs spread across her mahogany desk, the harsh fluorescent lights of her Phoenix office casting shadows that seemed to mirror the darkness of the case before her. At 2:17 a.m., she was alone in the Maricopa County Prosecutor's office, surrounded by empty coffee cups and the weight of an impossible decision. The photographs showed Miguel Martinez lying in a pool of blood, his wife Rosa kneeling beside him, and somewhere in that store had been their 3-year-old daughter, the only witness who could identify the gunman. 6 months had passed since that horrific night, and Emma Martinez had not spoken a single word. Not to her parents, not to doctors, not to the gentle child psychologists who had tried every technique in their arsenal. The silence of a traumatized toddler had become the loudest obstacle to justice Rachel had ever encountered in her 12-year career as a prosecutor. She picked up the forensic report for what felt like the 100th time, hoping to find some detail she had missed. The security camera system had been expertly disabled, not the work of a common street thief, but someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The only physical evidence was a single fingerprint found on a candy wrapper near where Emma had been hiding. That print belonged to Marcus Williams, a 24-year-old with a history of armed robbery who claimed he had been in the store earlier that day to buy cigarettes. Rachel's phone buzzed with a text from Detective Luis Morales. "Williams. Lawyer is pushing for dismissal. Says we have nothing but circumstantial evidence. Judge wants to meet tomorrow at 9 a.m. She rubbed her tired eyes and thought about Miguel Martinez, still recovering from his gunshot wound, walking with a permanent limp that served as a daily reminder of his family's nightmare. Rosa had aged 10 years and 6 months, a vibrant woman who once greeted every customer with a warm smile, now jumping at every shadow. And Emma, Sweet little Emma, who used to chatter nonstop about her toy cars and favorite cartoon characters, sat in silence, trapped in a world where words had become too dangerous to speak. The defense attorney, David Cross, was one of the best in the state. Rachel had faced him 3 times before and lost twice. Cross was already building his case around the trauma inflicted on Emma, arguing that forcing a mute 3-year-old to testify was not just ethically questionable, but potentially devastating to her psychological recovery. The media had picked up on this angle, with child advocacy groups organizing protests outside the courthouse. How can the state justify traumatizing a child twice? Dr. Margaret Fields, a prominent child psychologist, had declared on the evening news, "This little girl has already suffered enough. Putting her in a courtroom could cause irreparable psychological damage." But Rachel knew something that the protesters didn't. She had spent hours with Emma's therapist, Dr. Sarah Kim, learning about the complex world of childhood trauma. Emma wasn't just silent, she was selectively mute, a condition that often meant the child was capable of speech, but psychologically unable to use it. More importantly, Dr. Kim believed that Emma might speak if she felt safe enough, if the right circumstances aligned. Marcus Williams sat in county jail, maintaining his innocence with the kind of calm confidence that came from knowing the prosecution's case had a 3-year-old sized hole in it. His alibi was thin, but not impossible. He claimed to have been at his girlfriend's apartment during the robbery, but the girlfriend had a history of lying to protect him. Without Emma's testimony, the fingerprint evidence could be explained away as innocent contact during his earlier visit to the store. Rachel had interviewed Rosa Martinez dozens of times, hoping to find some detail that might strengthen the case. But Rosa's memory of that night was fragmented by trauma. Her recollections focused entirely on her husband's injuries rather than the attacker's identity. She remembered the black mask, the rough voice, the terror in her daughter's eyes, but nothing that would definitively point to Marcus Williams. "Please, Miss Stone," Rosa had pleaded during their last meeting, her English heavily accented by emotion. "My baby hasn't said mama in 6 months. She just sits and stares, like she's still hiding behind those candy shelves. If there's any chance she could help catch the man who did this to our family, we have to try." The legal precedent for child witnesses was murky at best. Courts had allowed testimony from children as young as 4, but 3-year-olds were virtually unheard of. Judge Patricia Williams would have to make a decision that could set legal precedent for the entire state. The defense had already filed motions claiming that a 3-year-old lacked the cognitive capacity to understand the difference between truth and fiction, let alone identify someone they had seen during a traumatic event 6 months earlier. Rachel opened her laptop and began typing her response to the defense motions, knowing that every word could mean the difference between justice and letting a dangerous criminal walk free. She argued that Emma's selective mutism was not an indicator of incompetence, but rather a symptom of trauma that could be addressed with proper support. She requested special accommodations, a closed courtroom, therapy dog assistance, and the presence of a child advocate throughout the proceedings. As dawn approached, Rachel finally closed her files and prepared to head home for a few hours of sleep before the crucial hearing. She thought about Emma Martinez, sleeping peacefully in her parents' arms, unaware that her silence held the key to justice. In a few hours, Rachel would have to convince a judge that sometimes the most important testimony comes not from what a witness says, but from what they have the courage to remember. The case that would define her career hung in the balance, and everything depended on whether a traumatized little girl could find her voice when justice needed it most. Rachel knew she was asking the impossible, but sometimes impossible was exactly what justice required. Dr. Sarah Kim knelt on the soft carpet of her child therapy office, watching 3-year-old Emma Martinez arrange wooden blocks in perfect silence. For 4 months now, Emma had attended sessions twice weekly, yet her lips remained sealed as tightly as the night that changed everything. The little girl moved with deliberate precision, building walls with her blocks, always walls, never houses or castles, like other children her age. "Emma, can you show me what happened to the little girl in your story?" Dr. Kim asked gently, gesturing toward the dollhouse that dominated one corner of the cheerfully decorated room. The dollhouse was a therapeutic tool, its rooms carefully designed to help children process trauma through play. But Emma simply shook her head and continued stacking blocks, creating barriers that seemed to mirror the walls she had built around her voice. The breakthrough techniques that had worked with hundreds of other traumatized children seemed powerless against Emma's selective mutism. Art therapy sessions produced drawing after drawing of dark figures and red crayon scribbles that clearly represented blood, but Emma refused to explain what the images meant. Play therapy revealed her obsession with hiding. She consistently placed dolls behind furniture, under tables, anywhere they couldn't be seen. Music therapy, which often unlocked expression in nonverbal children, resulted only in Emma covering her ears when certain sounds played. Dr. Kim had studied selective mutism for over 15 years, earning her doctorate specifically in childhood trauma responses. She understood that Emma's silence wasn't defiance or inability, it was protection. The little girl's mind had learned that speaking could be dangerous, that voices could attract attention from monsters wearing masks. Breaking through that psychological defense system required more than traditional therapy techniques. Her neural pathways had essentially rewired themselves around the trauma. Dr. Kim explained to Emma's parents during one of their weekly consultations. Miguel sat uncomfortably, his healing gunshot wound still causing pain when he moved. Rosa clutched a tissue box, her eyes red from sleepless nights spent worrying about her daughter's future. "But she can speak?" Miguel asked, his voice heavy with hope and desperation. "She's not damaged permanently?" "Physically, her vocal cords and speech mechanisms are perfectly healthy," Dr. Kim assured them. "This is psychological. Emma's brain is protecting her from what it perceives as danger. Speaking up led to violence in her experience, so her mind has decided that silence equals safety." Rosa leaned forward, grasping for any thread of hope. "What about hypnosis? Or those new medications we read about online?" Dr. Kim shook her head firmly. "Emma's too young for most pharmaceutical interventions, and hypnosis isn't appropriate for trauma this severe in someone her age. What we need is to rebuild her sense of safety and control. That takes time and the right trigger, something that makes her feel protected enough to risk speaking again." Meanwhile, across the city at the Phoenix Police Department, Officer Tom Bradley was preparing his golden retriever, Max, for their most challenging assignment yet. Max was a certified therapy dog with 5 years of experience comforting victims of violent crimes, abuse survivors, and traumatized witnesses. His gentle temperament and intuitive understanding of human distress had helped dozens of adults and children find the courage to testify in court. Officer Bradley, a 20-year veteran of the force, had partnered with Max after his own daughter experienced trauma-induced mutism following a car accident. He understood the delicate balance between providing comfort and not overwhelming an already fragile psyche. "Every child responds differently," he explained to Prosecutor Rachel Stone during their preparation meeting. "Some kids need Max to be playful and energetic to bring them out of their shells. Others need him calm and steady, like a furry security blanket. We won't know Emma's preference until we meet her." Max had undergone specialized training for courtroom appearances. He could remain perfectly still for hours, wouldn't react to raised voices or sudden movements, and had been desensitized to the formal atmosphere of legal proceedings. More importantly, he seemed to possess an almost supernatural ability to sense when humans needed comfort most. Dr. Kim had initially been skeptical about introducing animal-assisted therapy to Emma's treatment plan. "She's already built walls against human connection," she explained to Rachel Stone. Adding another variable could either be therapeutic or could cause her to retreat further. But Emma's case was running out of time and options. The trial date was approaching rapidly, and traditional therapy methods weren't yielding results. Dr. Kim decided to arrange a controlled meeting between Emma and Max in her office, with Officer Bradley present to monitor the interaction. The first meeting was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon. Emma arrived at Dr. Kim's office, clinging to her mother's hand. Her usual pattern of silent observation immediately activated. She scanned the room for threats, noting the unfamiliar man in uniform and the large golden dog sitting calmly beside him. Officer Bradley had positioned himself and Max near the window, far enough away to avoid overwhelming Emma, but close enough for her to observe them. Max lay down with his head on his paws, deliberately making himself appear smaller and less intimidating. His tail wagged slowly, a gentle invitation rather than an excited greeting. Emma's reaction was subtle but significant. For the first time in months, her rigid posture relaxed slightly. Her death grip on Rose's hand loosened, and her eyes fixed on Max with genuine curiosity rather than fear. "That's Max," Dr. Kim said softly. "He's here because he helps children feel safe. Would you like to know more about him?" Emma didn't respond verbally, but she took a tiny step forward. Max's tail wagged a bit faster, sensing her interest. Officer Bradley remained motionless, understanding that any sudden movement could shatter the delicate connection forming between the traumatized child and his therapy dog. Over the next several sessions, Emma's fascination with Max grew steadily. She would sit closer to him each visit, eventually reaching out to touch his soft fur with tentative fingers. Max seemed to understand her fragility, remaining perfectly still during their interactions, offering the kind of unconditional acceptance that only animals could provide. Dr. Kim observed these sessions with growing excitement. Emma's demeanor changed dramatically in Max's presence. Her shoulders relaxed, her breathing deepened, and most importantly, she began to smile. Small, fleeting expressions of joy, a genuine emotion breaking through the walls of trauma. The question remained, could Max's calming presence provide the safety Emma needed to find her voice again when it mattered most? The morning sun cast long shadows across the steps of Phoenix Superior Courthouse as news vans lined the street like mechanical vultures waiting for their prey. By 7 a.m., protesters had already assembled on both sides of the courthouse entrance, their competing chants creating a cacophony of conflicting voices. Child advocacy groups held signs reading, "Protect our children," and "Justice, not trauma," while victims' rights supporters countered with "Voice for the voiceless" and "Justice for the Martinez family." Inside the courthouse, Judge Patricia Williams sat in her chambers, reviewing the most controversial case of her 23-year judicial career. At 56, she had presided over thousands of cases, but never one that had drawn such intense media scrutiny or presented such complex ethical questions. The phone on her desk rang constantly with calls from legal scholars, child psychologists, and journalists seeking statements about the unprecedented nature of allowing a 3-year-old witness to testify. "Your Honor, the media is requesting permission to film inside the courtroom," her clerk, James Morrison, informed her through the intercom. "CNN, NBC, and 3 local stations have formal requests." Judge Williams shook her head firmly. "Absolutely not. This courtroom will be sealed. Only essential personnel, the jury, attorneys, and immediate family members. No cameras, no recording devices, and no spectators. This child has endured enough." 3 floors below, in the Victim Services office, Emma Martinez sat on her mother's lap, completely unaware of the circus surrounding her case. She wore her favorite purple dress with tiny flowers, the same outfit she had chosen for her last therapy session with Max. Rosa had braided her daughter's dark hair with extra care, whispering prayers in Spanish as she worked. Miguel paced nervously nearby, his limp more pronounced due to stress and the cold morning air affecting his old wound. Dr. Sarakim arrived at 8:30 a.m., carrying a small bag of Emma's familiar toys and comfort items. She had spent the previous evening preparing for every possible scenario, knowing that one wrong move could traumatize Emma further or cause her to retreat even deeper into silence. "How is she this morning?" Dr. Kim asked Rosa quietly, observing Emma's body language for signs of unusual stress. "She didn't sleep well," Rosa replied, dark circles under her own eyes, revealing that neither mother nor daughter had found peace the night before. "She keeps looking toward the door, like she's waiting for something." Emma was indeed watching the door, but not with fear, with anticipation. She had formed a strong attachment to Max during their recent therapy sessions, and some instinct told her that today was important, that Max would be there when she needed him most. In the courthouse parking garage, Officer Tom Bradley was conducting final preparations with Max. The golden retriever wore his official therapy dog vest, clearly identifying his role to everyone in the building. Bradley had arrived early to walk Max through the courtroom, allowing the dog to become familiar with the space and reducing any anxiety he might feel in the formal environment. "Today's the big day, buddy," Bradley murmured, running his hands through Max's thick coat. "That little girl is counting on us to help her find her courage." Defense attorney David Cross arrived at the courthouse surrounded by his own media scrum, confidently fielding questions about his strategy. "This case represents a dangerous precedent," he declared to the cameras. "The state is willing to traumatize a 3-year-old child to compensate for their weak evidence. Emma Martinez should be in a playground, not a courtroom." Cross was known for his theatrical courtroom style, but today he planned a more subdued approach. His client, Marcus Williams, had insisted on his innocence, and Cross genuinely believed that forcing a traumatized toddler to testify violated every principle of child protection he had spent his career defending. Prosecutor Rachel Stone entered through the building's secured back entrance, avoiding the media attention that could only add to the pressure she already felt. She had barely slept, running through possible scenarios and questions, trying to anticipate how Emma might react to the formal courtroom environment. The success of the prosecution's case rested entirely on whether a 3-year-old could overcome 6 months of trauma-induced silence to identify her family's attacker. At 9:45 a.m., the courtroom began filling with the limited number of people Judge Williams had approved. 12 jurors took their seats, their faces reflecting the gravity and unusual nature of the case they were about to hear. The jury selection process had taken 3 days, with both attorneys carefully screening potential jurors for their attitudes toward child witnesses and trauma responses. Marcus Williams entered wearing a simple gray suit, his expression carefully neutral. At 24, he had the kind of average appearance that made him blend into crowds: medium height, brown hair, unremarkable features that could easily be forgotten or confused. His calm demeanor suggested either genuine innocence or the practiced composure of someone accustomed to courtroom proceedings. The bailiff called for order as Judge Williams entered, her black robes seeming to carry the weight of precedent-setting decisions. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are here today for the case of State v. Marcus Williams. Before we begin, I want to address the unusual circumstances of this trial." Judge Williams explained the special accommodations that would be made for Emma's testimony, including the presence of a therapy dog in the closed courtroom. She reminded everyone present that they were witnessing a legal first in Arizona, and that their conduct would be scrutinized by child welfare experts, and legal scholars nationwide. Emma's family was escorted into the courtroom through a side entrance, avoiding the main corridor where Marcus Williams sat with his attorney. Emma's eyes immediately scanned the room, taking in the formal wooden benches, the elevated judge's bench, and the imposing American flag. The environment was unlike anything in her young experience, austere, serious, and filled with adults wearing stern expressions. Dr. Kim sat directly behind the Martinez family, ready to intervene if Emma showed signs of distress. She watched carefully as Emma's small hand gripped her mother's fingers tighter, the little girl's survival instincts activating in response to the unfamiliar and intimidating environment. "The state may call its first witness," Judge Williams announced, her voice carrying across the hushed courtroom. Rachel Stone stood slowly, knowing that everything depended on the next few minutes. "Your Honor, the state calls Emma Martinez to the stand." The courtroom held its collective breath as the most important witness in Arizona. Legal history prepared to take the stand, if she could find the courage to speak at all. The witness stand loomed before Emma Martinez like a mountain she could never climb. The specially modified chair, lowered to accommodate her 3-year-old frame, still seemed enormous compared to her tiny body. Rosa had carried Emma to the stand, whispering gentle encouragements in Spanish, but even her mother's loving presence couldn't penetrate the wall of terror that had rebuilt itself around the little girl's voice. "Emma, sweetheart, you're safe here," Judge Williams said in the softest tone she had ever used in her courtroom. "Can you tell us your name?" Emma's dark eyes darted frantically around the room, taking in the sea of adult faces all focused intently on her. Her small hands gripped the arms of the witness chair so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The court reporter, Jane Williams, sat with her fingers poised over the stenograph machine, but there were no words to record. Only silence, the same devastating silence that had protected Emma for 6 months, but now threatened to let her family's attacker escape justice. Dr. Sarah Kim watched from her seat behind the prosecution table, recognizing the signs of Emma's trauma response escalating. The little girl's breathing had become shallow and rapid, her shoulders hunched defensively around her ears. Emma was retreating into the same psychological shell that had kept her safe the night of the robbery, but this time, that safety mechanism was working against everything they hoped to achieve. "Your Honor," defense attorney David Cross said, rising from his chair with genuine concern in his voice, "this is exactly what we warned would happen. The child is clearly distressed. I move to have her removed from the stand immediately." Prosecutor Rachel Stone felt her carefully constructed case crumbling before her eyes. 6 months of preparation, countless hours of therapy, and hopes of an entire family hung in the balance as a traumatized 3-year-old sat frozen in terror. "Your Honor, may we have a brief recess to allow Emma to adjust to the environment?" Judge Williams was about to grant the recess when a soft knock came at the courtroom's side door. Officer Tom Bradley stood waiting with Max, both ready to fulfill their role as Emma's support system. The judge nodded her approval, understanding that this moment might be their last chance to reach the frightened child. The side door opened quietly, and Max padded into the courtroom with his characteristic gentle confidence. His golden coat seemed to capture and reflect every light in the room, creating an almost ethereal glow around the therapy dog. Max wore his official vest, clearly identifying his purpose, but to Emma, he was simply the friend who had helped her feel safe during their sessions with Dr. Kim. The transformation in Emma was immediate and remarkable. Her rigid posture began to soften as her eyes found Max across the courtroom. For the first time since entering the intimidating space, genuine recognition flickered across her face. The rapid, panicked breathing that had worried Dr. Kim began to slow as Emma focused entirely on the approaching dog. Max had been trained for exactly this scenario. He approached the witness stand slowly, deliberately, his movements calm and predictable. Officer Bradley remained near the door, understanding that his presence might be overwhelming for Emma in her current state. This moment belonged to Max and the little girl who needed him. "Emma, this is Max," Dr. Kim said softly, her voice carrying the warmth and familiarity that Emma associated with their therapy sessions. "He's here because he wants to help you feel brave, just like during our visits." The courtroom watched in absolute silence as Max positioned himself directly beside the witness stand. He was close enough for Emma to reach out and touch, but he waited patiently for her invitation. His tail wagged slowly, not with excitement but with the steady rhythm of reassurance that Emma had come to trust. Defense Attorney Cross started to object to the unconventional support arrangement, but Judge Williams silenced him with a sharp look. Even the most hardened legal professionals in the room could sense that something extraordinary was happening. The hostile, terrifying courtroom environment was being transformed by the simple presence of a dog who understood trauma in ways that humans often couldn't. Emma's small hand released its death grip on the chair arm and extended tentatively toward Max. When her fingers made contact with his soft fur, it was as if an electric current of comfort and courage flowed between them. Max remained perfectly still, allowing Emma to stroke his head and ears with a gentle touch that had become their ritual during therapy sessions. The jury watched in fascination as the frightened, silent child began to relax visibly. Juror number 7, a grandmother of 4, wiped away tears as she witnessed the healing power of the human-animal bond. Even Marcus Williams, sitting at the defendant's table, seemed moved by the tender interaction between the traumatized child and the therapy dog. "Emma," Judge Williams tried again, her voice barely above a whisper. "Max is here to help you feel safe. Is there anything you'd like to tell us about the night someone hurt your daddy?" Emma's hand continued stroking Max's fur, drawing strength from his calm presence. Her breathing had normalized, and the defensive tension in her shoulders had melted away. For the first time in 6 months, Emma Martinez looked like a normal 3-year-old, rather than a trauma victim frozen in fear. Dr. Kim held her breath, recognizing the signs that Emma was approaching a breakthrough moment. The selective mutism that had protected her was beginning to crack, not through force or pressure, but through the gentle encouragement of an animal who asked nothing from her except to trust. Officer Bradley watched from his position near the door, marveling at Max's intuitive understanding of exactly what Emma needed. The dog had worked with dozens of traumatized children, but this connection seemed especially profound. Max seemed to sense that this little girl carried secrets that needed to be shared, that her silence was protecting a dangerous man who might hurt other families. Emma's lips parted slightly, and the courtroom leaned forward collectively, afraid to breathe, lest they break the spell that Max had woven around the frightened child. After 6 months of silence, after countless therapy sessions and sleepless nights, the moment of truth had finally arrived. The golden retriever remained motionless beside the witness stand, his presence serving as a bridge between Emma's trauma and her courage. Whatever happened next would change everything for Emma, for her family, for the pursuit of justice, and for the understanding of how healing could emerge from the most unexpected partnerships. The courtroom existed in a state of suspended animation, every person frozen in anticipation as Emma Martinez's small fingers continued their gentle exploration of Max's golden fur. The therapy dog remained statue still beside the witness stand, his warm brown eyes fixed on Emma's face with an intensity that seemed to communicate volumes without a single sound. 6 months of silence hung in the air like a held breath, waiting to be either released or shattered forever. Dr. Sarah Kim recognized the subtle shift in Emma's posture that preceded her most significant breakthroughs during therapy. The little girl's shoulders had dropped from their defensive position around her ears, and her breathing had settled into the deep, steady rhythm that indicated she felt truly safe. But more importantly, Emma's eyes had taken on a different quality. Instead of the vacant, thousand-yard stare that had characterized her trauma response, there was focus, awareness, and something that looked remarkably like determination. Judge Patricia Williams had presided over thousands of testimonies, but she had never felt the weight of a moment like this one. The entire legal system seemed to pivot on whether a 3-year-old could overcome the psychological barriers that trauma had erected around her voice. The judge's own heart hammered against her ribs as she watched Emma's lips part slightly, the first indication that words might be struggling to emerge from 6 months of protective silence. Rosa Martinez gripped her husband Miguel's hand so tightly that her fingernails drew blood, but neither of them noticed the pain. Their daughter sat just 20 feet away, closer to speaking than she had been since that horrific night that had shattered their family's sense of security. Rosa whispered silent prayers in Spanish, bargaining with every saint she could remember if they would just give her little girl the courage to find her voice. Prosecutor Rachel Stone felt as though her entire career had led to this single moment. The case that had consumed her thoughts for months, the countless hours of preparation, the sleepless nights spent strategizing, everything came down to whether Emma could overcome her trauma long enough to identify the man who had destroyed her family's peace. Rachel's hands trembled slightly as she maintained her position near the prosecution table, afraid that even the smallest movement might break whatever spell Max had cast over the traumatized child. Defense attorney David Cross found himself in an impossible position. His client's freedom depended on Emma's continued silence, yet witnessing the little girl's struggle against her own trauma created a conflict between professional duty and human compassion. Cross had built his career on protecting the innocent, and watching Emma fight to overcome her psychological wounds reminded him that sometimes innocence came in forms he hadn't expected. Marcus Williams sat at the defendant's table, his carefully maintained composure beginning to crack as he watched the drama unfold. For 6 months, he had relied on a 3-year-old's silence to protect him from consequences. Now, as Emma's connection with Max deepened, Williams felt the first stirrings of genuine fear. His hands clenched into fists beneath the table as he watched his fate rest in the small hands currently stroking a therapy dog's fur. The jury members had been selected for their ability to remain objective, but objectivity seemed impossible in the face of such raw human drama. Juror number 3, a father of twin daughters, felt tears threatening as he watched Emma's internal battle play out in real time. Juror number 9, a retired teacher who had worked with traumatized children, recognized the signs of a breakthrough and found herself silently encouraging the little girl to find her courage. Officer Tom Bradley watched from his position near the courtroom door, marveling at Max's intuitive understanding of the moment's importance. The golden retriever seemed to sense that Emma was approaching a crucial decision, and his presence intensified without becoming overwhelming. Max's tail had stopped wagging entirely, as if he understood that even that gentle movement might distract from the enormous effort Emma was making to speak. Emma's internal struggle was visible to everyone in the courtroom. Her small face reflected the war between the protective silence that had kept her safe and the desperate need to help her family find justice. The trauma that had stolen her voice whispered that speaking was dangerous, that words brought attention from monsters with guns. But Max's presence created a bubble of safety that seemed to push back against those dark whispers. Suddenly, Emma's entire body went rigid. Her hand froze on Max's head as her eyes swept across the courtroom, taking in the faces of everyone present. When her gaze reached the defendant's table, her pupils dilated with recognition that was unmistakable to everyone watching. The memory that had been locked away behind walls of trauma came flooding back with crystal clarity. She saw the mask again, the cold eyes visible through the holes, the hands that had held the gun that hurt her daddy. But this time, instead of hiding behind candy displays, she had Max beside her, Dr. Kim watching protectively, and her parents' love surrounding her like armor against the memories. Emma's arm rose slowly, her small index finger extending toward Marcus Williams with the unwavering certainty that only truth could provide. The defendant's face paled as he realized his protection was crumbling before his eyes. Defense attorney. Cross half rose from his seat, instinctively preparing an objection, but the words died in his throat as he witnessed the moment of recognition that would change everything. The courtroom held its collective breath as Emma's lips parted, and, for the first time in 6 months, sound emerged. Her voice was small, barely above a whisper, but in the absolute silence of the courtroom, every syllable carried with the force of a thunderclap. Bad man. The 2 words hung in the air, like a verdict from heaven itself. Emma's finger remained, pointed directly at Marcus Williams, her child's innocence cutting through 6 months of legal maneuvering with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. There was no uncertainty in her voice, no hesitation in her identification. She had found her. Courage in the presence of a golden retriever who understood that sometimes the most important words came from the smallest voices. The impact was immediate and devastating. Marcus Williams slumped in his chair as if struck by a physical blow, his carefully constructed facade of innocence cracking like glass. The jury gasped collectively, and several members leaned forward, as if drawn by the magnetic power of truth, finally spoken aloud. Emma had spoken, and in doing so, she had changed everything. The aftermath of Emma's testimony sent shockwaves through the legal community that reached far beyond the walls of Phoenix Superior Courthouse. Within hours, legal scholars from Harvard to Stanford were debating the implications of a 3-year-old's words changing the trajectory of a major criminal case. CNN's lead legal analyst called it the most compelling witness identification in modern jurisprudence, while child psychology experts appeared on every major network to discuss the breakthrough moment that had captivated the nation. Judge Patricia Williams called for a 30-minute recess immediately following Emma's identification, understanding that everyone in the courtroom needed time to process what they had witnessed. Emma herself seemed drained by the enormous effort of speaking, collapsing against Max with the exhaustion that comes after breaking through months of psychological barriers. Dr. Sarah Kim quickly approached the witness stand, gently guiding Emma back to her parents, while Max remained close by, sensing that his work was far from over. Defense attorney David Cross huddled with Marcus Williams in the courthouse's attorney-client conference room, the defendant's carefully maintained composure completely shattered. Williams slumped in his chair, his hands shaking as the reality of his situation crashed over him like a tidal wave. "She's just a baby," Williams whispered, his voice hollow with defeat. How can she remember so clearly? It was dark. She was hiding. It happened so fast. Cross studied his client with the keen eye of someone who had defended hundreds of criminals over his 20-year career. The man sitting across from him bore little resemblance to the confident defendant who had maintained his innocence for 6 months. "Marcus, if there's something you need to tell me, now is the time." That little girl's identification, combined with the fingerprint evidence and your inconsistent alibi, creates a perfect storm for the prosecution. Williams buried his face in his hands, the weight of his choices finally becoming unbearable. The image of Emma's small finger, pointing directly at him, replayed in his mind like a nightmare he couldn't escape. "I never meant for anyone to get hurt," he finally admitted, his voice breaking. "The gun wasn't supposed to be loaded. I just needed money for my sister's medical bills, and I thought a small store would have cash, but no security. The confession hung in the air between attorney and client, changing everything about their defense strategy. Cross had seen this moment countless times before, the point where maintaining innocence became impossible. where the weight of evidence and truth finally overwhelmed a defendant's ability to deny reality. Meanwhile, prosecutor Rachel Stone worked feverishly to adapt her strategy to the new circumstances. Emma's breakthrough had provided the missing piece of her case, but she needed to ensure that the jury understood the significance of what they had witnessed. She called Dr. Kim as an expert witness to explain selective mutism and why Emma's identification carried such extraordinary weight. Selective mutism in trauma cases isn't simply an inability to speak, Dr. Kim explained to the riveted jury during the trial's resumption. It's a protective mechanism where the brain associates speaking with danger. For Emma to overcome that psychological barrier and identify someone in a courtroom setting required her to feel absolutely safe and completely certain about what she was saying. The forensic evidence that had seemed circumstantial suddenly took on new meaning when viewed through the lens of Emma's identification. The fingerprint on the candy wrapper near Emma's hiding spot wasn't just random contact from an earlier visit. It was proof that Marcus Williams had been in exactly the location where the only witness had been hiding. His inconsistent alibi, claiming to be at his girlfriend's apartment during the robbery, crumbled when confronted with Emma's unwavering certainty. Williams' girlfriend, Sarah Chun, took the stand with obvious reluctance. Her previous statements about his whereabouts falling apart under cross-examination. "He asked me to say he was with me all night," she finally admitted, tears streaming down her face. "But he didn't get to my apartment until almost midnight, and he was acting really strange, like he was scared of something." The trial's momentum had shifted completely. What had begun as a weak case built on circumstantial evidence had transformed into an overwhelming demonstration of guilt. The jury watched Williams closely as witness after witness testified, noting how he avoided eye contact and seemed to shrink further into his chair with each piece of evidence. During closing arguments, Rachel Stone stood before the jury with the confidence of someone who had truth on her side. "Ladies and gentlemen, you witnessed something extraordinary in this courtroom. A 3-year-old child found the courage to overcome 6 months of trauma-induced silence to identify the man who terrorized her family. Emma Martinez didn't speak those words lightly. She spoke them because she recognized the person who destroyed her sense of safety and nearly killed her father." Defense attorney Cross faced an impossible task in his closing argument. His client's confession had forced him to shift from claiming innocence to arguing for leniency based on lack of intent to cause serious harm. Marcus Williams made a terrible mistake that spiraled out of control, he told the jury. He never intended for Miguel Martinez to be shot, never wanted to traumatize a 3-year-old child. His desperation to help his sick sister led him to make choices that he will regret for the rest of his life. The jury deliberated for 6 hours, a remarkably short time for such a serious case. When they returned, their faces reflected the gravity of their decision. Judge Williams called for order as the jury foreman, a 52-year-old construction supervisor, stood to deliver their verdict. On the charge of armed robbery in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, we find the defendant guilty. The words hit Marcus Williams like physical blows, each guilty verdict sealing his fate. Emma's parents embraced each other as tears of relief and validation flowed freely. Emma herself sat in Dr. Kim's arms, with Max pressed against her legs. Too young to fully understand the legal proceedings, but sensing that something important had been resolved. During sentencing 3 weeks later, Judge Williams imposed 15 years in state prison, citing the severe trauma inflicted on the Martinez family and the courage required for Emma to testify. This case will be remembered not just for its legal precedent, the judge stated, but for demonstrating that truth has a voice, regardless of age, and that justice can emerge from even the most unexpected sources. As Marcus Williams was led away in handcuffs, Emma spoke her third word since that terrible night 6 months earlier. "Daddy?" she asked, looking up at Miguel. It was a question, but also a statement. It may be now, finally, they could all feel safe again. 18 months after that pivotal courtroom moment, 4-year-old Emma Martinez burst through the doors of the Phoenix Police Department with the boundless energy of a child who had rediscovered the joy of being heard. Her weekly visits to see Officer Tom Bradley and Max had become the highlight of her week, a ritual that symbolized her complete transformation from a trauma-stricken, silent child into a vibrant, talkative little girl who couldn't seem to stop, sharing stories about her adventures. "Max! Max!" Emma called out, her voice echoing through the police station corridors with the crystal clarity that still amazed everyone who remembered her months of silence. The golden retriever emerged from Bradley's office with his characteristic gentle enthusiasm, his tail wagging in the steady rhythm that had first helped Emma feel safe enough to speak. Their bond had deepened far beyond the therapeutic relationship. That saved her voice. Max had become her confidant, protector, and best friend. Officer Bradley watched their reunion with the same wonder he felt every week. "How's my favorite witness doing today?" he asked, ruffling Emma's dark hair as she buried her face in Max's golden coat. The question was both playful and profound. Emma had indeed become the most famous child witness in Arizona history, her case study being taught in law schools and police academies across the country. "I helped Mama paint the new store yesterday," Emma announced proudly, her words tumbling over each other in her excitement to share. "And I made a special corner just for you and Max to visit us. Daddy says you can have all the dog treats you want because you're the best police dog in the whole world." The Martinez family's new convenience store had opened 6 months earlier in a bustling Phoenix shopping center, a far cry from the small neighborhood market where their nightmare had begun. The new location featured state-of-the-art security systems, bright lighting, and wide aisles that eliminated hiding spots where danger could lurk. But the most unique feature was Emma's corner, a small section near the front register decorated with her colorful artwork, dog toys for visiting, therapy animals, and a framed photograph of the moment she and Max first met in Dr. Kim's office. Miguel Martinez had recovered completely from his physical wounds, though he still walked with a slight limp that served as a reminder of how close they had come to losing everything. More importantly, he had healed from the psychological trauma that had haunted him since the shooting. Watching his daughter find her voice and courage had inspired his own journey back to feeling safe in the world. Emma talks so much now that sometimes Rosa and I joke we miss the quiet, Miguel told Officer Bradley during one of their visits, his eyes sparkling with the kind of joy that only comes after surviving unimaginable darkness. But we never really mean it. Every word she speaks is a miracle we don't take for granted. Rosa Martinez had channeled her experience into advocacy work, becoming a spokesperson for victims' rights organizations and child trauma recovery programs. She traveled across Arizona, sharing Emma's story at conferences and training sessions, helping other families understand that healing was possible, even after the most devastating experiences. Dr. Sarah Kim had published groundbreaking research based on Emma's case, contributing to a revolution in how the medical community approached childhood selective mutism and trauma recovery. Her paper, Animal-Assisted Breakthrough in Pediatric Trauma Cases, the Emma Martinez study, had been cited in over 200 subsequent research projects and had led to the implementation of therapy, dog programs in children's hospitals nationwide. Emma's case taught us that healing doesn't always follow the timeline we expect. Dr. Kim explained to a packed auditorium at the American Psychological Association's annual conference. Sometimes a child needs to feel completely safe before they can risk being vulnerable again. Max didn't just help Emma speak. He helped her trust that her voice mattered and would be protected. The legal implications of Emma's testimony had created lasting changes in Arizona's court system. The Emma Martinez Protocol now provided standardized procedures for child witnesses, including mandatory therapy dog availability, specially trained child advocates, and modified courtroom environments designed to reduce intimidation. Judge Patricia Williams had been instrumental in developing these guidelines, drawing on her unprecedented experience with Emma's case. Emma changed how we think about justice. Judge Williams reflected during a judicial conference celebrating the new protocols. She reminded us that truth doesn't always speak in the voice we expect, and that sometimes the most powerful testimony comes from those who have overcome the greatest obstacles to deliver it. Marcus Williams served his 15-year sentence at Arizona State Prison, where he had become a model prisoner working in the facility's dog training program. Ironically, his daily interactions with therapy dogs in training had given him insight into the healing power of the same animals that had made his conviction possible. He had written several letters to the Martinez family expressing his remorse. Though they had chosen not to respond, forgiveness was a journey they weren't yet ready to undertake. Emma's transformation extended far beyond her recovered voice. She had developed into a confident, empathetic child who showed remarkable emotional intelligence for her age. Teachers at her preschool noted her unusual ability to comfort other children who were upset or scared, as if her own experience with trauma had given her special insight into others' pain. Emma has this gift for making people feel safe. Her teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, observed, "When new children start school and they're crying for their parents, Emma always knows exactly what to say to help them feel better. It's like she understands fear in a way most children her age don't." The ripple effects of Emma's courage continued to expand in ways her family never could have imagined. The Max Foundation, established in honor of the therapy dog who had changed their lives, now funded animal-assisted therapy programs for trauma survivors across the Southwest. Emma served as the foundation's youngest spokesperson, appearing at fundraising events where her mere presence reminded supporters of the life-changing work they were supporting. As Emma played with Max in the police station's break room, surrounded by officers who had all heard her story and been moved by her resilience, it was impossible not to see the profound transformation that had taken place. The little girl who had once been trapped in silence now filled every room with laughter, questions, and the kind of boundless curiosity that defined childhood at its best. "You know what, Max?" Emma whispered into the golden retriever's ear as she hugged him goodbye. "I think we helped a lot of people find their voices too." And in that simple observation from a 4-year-old, the true legacy of Emma Martinez became clear. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the most powerful messages, and sometimes the greatest healing comes from helping others find their own courage to speak their truth.